So what is the main takeaway on this little expose of the various LGBT organizations in the San Francisco Bay Area? The main takeaway is that LGBT organizations largely don't help gay or bisexual men specifically, unless it's an HIV charity. So when it comes to community building, a large portion of funding is going to organizations that peddle a political ideology, or organizations that don't particularly care about gay or bisexual men and consider them more of a problem than people that need help. And what help is provided, it usually goes to general LGBT organizations which help gay and bisexual men because they fall into general demographics that they serve and don't really care too much about specific issues. If anything, the current movement is more interested in homogenizing gay men, lesbians, and bisexual people into one queer identity and erasing our different lived experiences because we aren't seen as necessary to keep the movement, organizations, communities, whatever you want to call them, going. Not to mention that they don't think we have problems anyways. By looking at their presence on social media, the activist types, we can tell between them and the people in academia, bloggers, that by what they are writing, a lot of them don't understand what the movement is, where it came from, and they honestly think it could continue without having, the G, L, and B portions even being a part of the quote-unquote demographic anymore. And what they push for now is just visibility of trans people, or just visibility generally, without really doing much to help anybody in any material way. Now, before we move on, I have to do a disclaimer. It's a little hashtag not all organizations are bad. Some are still doing a lot of good work and aren't as infested with a specific political doctrine. What I am saying is to investigate organizations that you either want to give money to or work with in the future. Although some of the organizations that were highlighted were among the worst, there are others out there, and the bad ones are the minority, but they tend to be the largest organizations. The ones that do the best work tend to be smaller, and the ones that don't seek, big amounts of attention. The Horizons Foundation is a community foundation formed in 1982 in San Francisco to funnel money to newly created organizations and other priorities within the LGBT demographic. This isn't offensive at all, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. Their own websites sees the LGBT movement as part of a much larger movement for social justice. This is where things start getting dodgy. As mentioned in the previous segment, some of the organizations that receive money from them, like the Rise Center, are blatantly pro-social justice as an ideology, not a concept. And this is an ideology that has been growing like cancer within the left for the better part of a decade. This is the same set of politics that says women and non-whites are weak and inferior, and somehow an Islamist is more progressive than an American conservative. The board and the various committee members of the Horizon Foundation, for the most part, seem to be well-connected managers in various types of businesses and nonprofits within San Francisco. Now, this doesn't seem horrible. Managing a charity must be very hard, and you would need experience to handle all the money and seem credible, besides having to deal with all the federal disclosing standards. But if there's one thing that politics in the last 2 years has dredged to the surface, it's the links between large business and civil society. And it is well known that LGBT anything is somehow tied to politics, no matter how tolerant US politics has become of LGBT people in the last few years. Meaning that whatever charity could come from an organization such as this, it will be linked to politics because that is the nature of any large, well-financed LGBT organization. On the note of finances, you might be wondering what the financial state of the Horizons Foundation is, since that is what we've been going through in this documentary, and we will get to that shortly. The Horizons Foundation is a community foundation, which means it's a non-profit, philanthropic organization whose goal is to create permanent named funds that will support charitable activities within a given geographic area. But as you will see going through some of their financial documents, foundations can do more than just help people in a single geographic area. The Horizons Foundation raised $4.7 million in 2016, and this money came from a few different areas, as is normal with most charitable organizations. 2.9 of that 4.7 came from individual donors, 220,000 or so was raised from corporations, 572,000 was bequeathed to the organization from deceased donors, and 163,000 was the net revenue from their fundraising efforts in 2016, as well as 830,000 coming from assets being released. It is still very apparent that the Horizons Foundation gets most of its money from individual donors rather than from corporations or local government. Their fundraising numbers also makes it interesting that they would have upper and middle management types in most of their upper positions. It would make sense to have corporate types running these things if the lion's share of donations came from corporations. Another question is, where does the money go? Where the money goes is interesting. Some of these organizations that receive money were already mentioned, but we need to look at their financials for more specific numbers. All the numbers are from 2016. The total amount that went to quote-unquote community issues was $379,500. 131,000 or so went to various scholarships, and $66,800 went to various other campaigns. The largest and most interesting section is the Global Faith and Equity Grant section. This section gave over $505,000. Of this, $200,000 went to the following organizations: the Southern Poverty Law Center, Media Matters, Planned Parenthood, and a group called Political Research Associates. None of these organizations are specifically religious, and all of them are overtly political and and divisive to the greater population. Out of this fund, $265,000 went to a religious foundation, an overseas family planning organization, and a legal defense organization. For reference, Media Matters got around $40,000, and all of the organizations in the list that provide mental health service got $70,000 out of the community grants, which represents 7 different organizations. To break down the numbers and the categories a little more, the community issues portion is where most of the direct services are: cultural organizations, other charities, and various other community services. Why this is a big deal is because the 4 more political organizations aren't specifically LGBT, and not only that, but they're also national organizations. Whatever your political persuasion is, money that is being raised in the name to forward LGBT causes shouldn't be going to political organizations even if they ask for money. You might be thinking, but they track hate groups. Quite frankly, the SPLC will likely label me and the other people working on this video as a hate group because we are exposing that they're getting money from less than savory locations. Our point with all of this is that LGBT organizations have become overly political, dominated by a very hostile political ideology, and is serving itself on the side and not doing much to help people that it says it's helping.